Well, good morning again, everybody. It's August the 23rd, 2020, and we are here for another adult Sunday school class with the Goldendale Church of the Nazarene. So good morning to all of you. Today we have been, the last couple weeks we've been looking at the reigns of David and then Solomon, his son, which we said was kind of the 1-2 punch of what a righteous king should look like and what he should do. And so for this next lesson and the one following it, we're going to be looking at the subsequent kings of Judah up until the exile. We're going to get an idea of how well they did in comparison to the standard that was set for us by David and Solomon. And you might recall that as the chronicler told the stories of David and Solomon, he left out a few unsavory instances of whatever, sins they might have committed, because he was trying to show that they were, a model, a pattern that everyone should follow. So let's see how well they did. And in order to go through this, what I've done is I've made us a table to look at, and I'll just explain as we go here. I've named all the rulers of Judah, whether they were good or evil, how long they reigned, whether they were visited by a prophet or priest, and what they died of if known. And as it turns out, I was trying to find a marker that would give us a good idea of, how to say whether they were following the pattern or not. And I would say that their length of reign might not be as good a marker as whether they were visited by a prophet and priest and how they treated that person. And as we go through this, we're going to see all those differences. So let's begin with Rehoboam, who was the first king after Solomon. He was Solomon's son, and he began well enough, I suppose. He was ruling over the entire kingdom that his father had left to him. But early on in his reign, some people from the northern kingdom came down to ask him if they could perhaps lower the taxes over what his father had been having them pay. And he listened, which often does seem to happen. He listened to these advisors and he ended up saying, "No, I'm going to actually increase your taxes." Well, whereupon they all said, "Well, you know what? We really don't need you as king then, if that's how you're going to be." So 10 of the 12 tribes, basically one country of Israel with their capital in Samaria, leaving Rehoboam in charge of basically the kingdom of Judah in the south, capital of Jerusalem. He had some Judahites, the tribe of Judah, and he had some Benjaminites, and he had some Levites, but he didn't have the strength of Milcom had. But even so, as you see, he ruled for 17 years. And at one point, when an enemy was going to kind of come after him, he was approached by a prophet, Shemaiah, who basically told him, if you humble yourself, God will not abandon you. And so he did, and God did not abandon him. And so he went on. We don't even know what he died of in the end. But the thing is, we can't really say he was a good king. He a good king of convenience. When it suited him, he followed the Lord, but overall, he was pretty much evil. His son Abijah, on the other hand, as far as we can tell from everything written about him, which isn't much, was a good king. But he only ruled for 3 years, which seems kind of strange. A good king, you would think, would rule for longer. He was never approached by a prophet or a priest, and that might be because they didn't need to. He already was doing the right thing. And he, again, died an unspecified death. We don't know what he died of. His son Asa took over, a good king, but kind of foolish, I have to say. I mean, that was kind of the thing with Asa. He did everything right. He got rid of the pagan altars, and he got people to serve God again. There was a lot of peace and prosperity in his reign, but then in his 35th year, that's when he blew it. He made a treaty with Syria against Israel because he was nervous about Israel making noises. They were going to come down and have war with him. Okay, so he makes this treaty with Syria, but don't you kind of think he should have talked to God? maybe, but he didn't. And once he didn't, he kind of just got in that habit. Well, even though he was visited by a couple of prophets along the way, one encouraged him, one warned him, he went and did his own. In the end, God sent him a foot disease, which seems very symbolic to me, because we talk about the Christian walk, the walk of faith. It's kind of a challenge to do that when you have a foot disease. But regardless of that, that's all we really know about Asa. He must have died more or less in peace, because the Bible doesn't say. But he's followed by Jehoshaphat, who was one of the greatest kings. He really could have been in the first rank of kings. He did so many good things. Not only did he follow the Lord, but he sent teachers out into the land so that others could learn how to follow the Lord. He did many good things. But the one bad was stupid. He intermarried, or had his son marry Ahab's daughter, so that now Ahab, and you might remember Ahab in the northern kingdom, married to Jezebel. When you look in the dictionary under evil, there's a picture of Ahab and Jezebel. They were bad news. So he goes and gets himself a really bad set of in-laws. And this is going to haunt, even though he reigns for 25 years, he gets sucked into some stuff, wars and different things. You can see that he's visited, or he and Ahab are visited by a number of different prophets over the course of his reign. And the main one is Micaiah, who, when Ahab wanted Jehoshaphat to go to war with him, they consulted Ahab's false prophets, who said, sure, go ahead, you're going to succeed. But Jehoshaphat, to his credit, insisted on talking to a priest of the Lord, or a prophet of the Lord. And Micaiah did not say that they would succeed. In fact, he said Ahab would be killed. Well, Ahab didn't like that. He put Micaiah in prison, but he was killed, so he never lived to carry out any kind of sentence. I should read about Jehoshaphat, because overall he was so close to being a really great king, but he just made that one dumb decision, which only goes to show you all of us can be in that boat, right? We can all be doing great and make one bad decision that haunts us forever, because the consequences of our decisions linger on long after the decision has been made. Well, his son Jehoram, as if payback for the bad decision, he was an evil king pretty much from the get-go. When he became king, he killed all some other leaders in Judah. And the Lord kept him around, though, because of the promise that God had made that there would always be a ruler from David's line on the throne. He let Jehoram live, but he only ruled for 8 years. Elijah, the prophet Elijah, sent him a letter basically telling him, you know what, you've been a really bad king, and here's what's going to happen to you. You're going to get this nasty intestinal disease that's going to get more severe every day until your bowels come out. You are going to have one painful death. But that, I don't think of you on things. He continued on the way he was. And when he died of his disease, his son Ahaziah took over for 1 year. No prophet bothered to visit him, but he was executed by the people, basically, because he was not a good king, and the Lord sent Jehu to kill Ahab, and Ahaziah was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was visiting up there, and he got himself executed as well, which was, of course, something that the Lord decided just to clean house. But you know what? Things could only get worse at this point in their career. His mother, Athaliah, was very angry that her son had been killed. So angry that she killed all, or at least she thought, all of the legitimate heirs to the throne, and took over ruling herself. But she was an evil queen. She was from the house of Ahab herself. Jezebel might even have been her mother. It's not really very clear. But she was evil from the get-go. She ruled for 7 years, and no prophet bothered to talk to her. It would have been, I guess, a waste of time. But there was a palace coup by the high priest Jehoiada, who said to all of the faithful in Israel, we need to get rid of this lady and put the rightful king on the throne, because there was one boy left. He was 8 years old. So that was what happened. They led a coup. They had her executed. It was very mean and nasty, but I guess justice in its own way. Joash, the one remaining son, began to rule at age 8. And thankfully, Jehoiada, the high priest, stayed on as his advisor, because otherwise I don't know if he would have had much of a good role model. But because Jehoiada was there to advise him, he was a very good king for a very long time. He did a lot of good things. He did a lot for the temple, some reforms, different religious practices that he wanted to strengthen Israel's faith, or Judah's faith in the Lord. But here's what happens then. Jehoiada passes away, and then Joash becomes evil almost at once. He decides that he's just going to go do his own thing. But he did still reign for 40 years. The worst thing that he did, though, I think the thing that sealed his doom, was that Jehoiada's son, Zechariah, came to tell him that he was heading in the wrong direction. And his answer to Zechariah was basically to put him in the stocks. Well, the faithful contingent in Judah, again, they just didn't care for that at all. They didn't like the way things were going. They had him murdered, so off with him, and Amaziah becomes king in his place. Another mixed bag here with Amaziah. He was he was another one who could have been a pretty good king, but he didn't listen to the right people. The sad part with that Amaziah, though, is that he got himself not only murdered, but his subjects decided that he was just not going to be a good king for them. So even though a man had come to try and encourage him, and a prophet had come to try and warn him, he continued in his evil ways once he went that way, and he was merely assassinated by people in his kingdom. So they put Uzziah on the throne after that. And Uzziah was a good king. He was a very good king. Actually, almost his entire reign, God really blessed him with peace, prosperity, everything. For 52 years almost, he made it. But, 3 years before the end of his reign, he did a very foolish thing. He was so proud that everything that had happened, he was so wonderful, he thought he was going to go into the temple and offer incense. Well, you just don't do that unless you are of the priestly class. And the high priest Azariah, among others, tried to tell him, don't do this, it's wrong. Well, he went ahead, he did it anyway. And God sent him a skin disease, which we think was probably leprosy, but we aren't totally sure about that. But the last few years of his reign, he lived in isolation because he had this disease, and so his son really pretty much king regent until he ruled in his own stead. And he was a good king too, without any of this offering incense in the temple stuff. So he ruled for 16 years, and he was good from beginning to end. The prophet had to visit him because he knew what he was doing, and he was doing good things. He did his reign and let him prosper. He died an unspecified death, which probably means that he died in peace. Finally, today we're going to talk about King Ahaz, who was unfortunately an evil king. Yeah, he was not a good guy. He got all of Israel to sin because he was sacrificing to the wrong gods. Now, he was defeated by Syria, and the message he took from that was not that he was living wrong, but that Syria must be powerful because they gave the Syrians victory, and therefore he ought to worship them. What a smart idea. Not. But that really made God not happy, shall we say. So he died an unspecified. In Judah were not particularly happy with him. And when he died, they did bury him in Jerusalem, but not in the royal cemetery of the kings of Judah. So there you have it, the first bunch of kings. And you can see it's a real mixed bag. We're going to see more of that in our next installment, which will be the end of Chronicles. So stay tuned for the remainder of Chronicles. I hope you all have a next week.